Hi, my name's Jolene Whitman. On my 33rd birthday, my parents handed me a silver envelope, wrapped like a gift, tied with a bow. Inside was an eviction notice. No warning, no apology, just silence, and a signature. They smiled while they erased me, right in my own home. Since then, I've discovered forged documents, secret meetings, and a cousin who turned my childhood room into a showroom for investors. But the part that still haunts me? They didn't ask me to leave. They planned it so I'd never belong in the first place. Why would a family do this, and still call it love? The morning sun filtered through the linen curtains of my kitchen, catching on the copper handles I had polished myself just the day before. It was my 33rd birthday, but there wasn't a balloon in sight, only the soft clink of plates, the hum of the old ceiling fan, and the low murmurs of relatives filling the house I'd spent 6 years bringing back from the brink. The house on Willow Street wasn't just an address. It was the one thing I had managed to rebuild with my bare hands after everything else in my life had quietly crumbled. Every floorboard told a story. Every windowpane reflected years of sacrifices I never mentioned out loud. I thought today might be simple. A gathering, a cake, maybe even a laugh or two with people I called family. I thought wrong. They arrived just after 10. My father was the first through the door, looking older than I remembered, followed by my mother, who brought along a store-bought pie wrapped in foil. My brother Daniel came with his wife, quiet as always. And then there was Callista, my cousin, who showed up in a silk blouse, heels too sharp for wood floors, and a voice sugar-coated with pleasantries. I had spent the morning arranging lavender from the garden into mason jars, placing them by the windows like Grandma used to. I baked the cake myself, vanilla with lemon frosting, a nod to the recipe she passed down in a notebook I still kept in the kitchen drawer. I had wanted the day to feel rooted, intentional. Maybe if I created something beautiful, they'd remember how much I had loved this place. "Jolene, open your gift," my mother said, her voice a little too high, her hands too still. She passed me a silver envelope tied with a neat red bow. For a second, I thought maybe it was a card with something sentimental. Maybe a framed photo of Grandma and me from the summer we painted the porch swing. But the moment I slid my thumb beneath the fold and pulled out the papers, I knew this wasn't anything like that. The room quieted. I felt the heat rise in my chest before I even finished reading the header. Notice of eviction. Effective in 45 days. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My mouth went dry. The scent of lemon frosting turned sour in my nose. The signature on the document was my father's. Below it, in delicate cursive, was my mother's. I looked up. No one met my eyes. "It's not what you think," Daniel offered, stepping back slightly. Callista just smiled. Tight, knowing, like a woman watching her plan fall into place. "You're all serious?" My voice cracked somewhere between confusion and disbelief. "You're giving me this today, of all days? We thought you'd take it better if it came from us directly," my mother said, her eyes darting to the side. "It's time, Jolene. The house is worth something now. It makes sense." "To who?" I asked. "You mean it's worth more without me in it?" Callista stepped forward. "Let's not make this messy. It's a property decision, not personal." "Not personal?" I laughed or tried to. "You stood in my kitchen, drank my coffee, and handed me an eviction notice like it was a party favor. Then I noticed it. The photo wall near the hallway, once filled with decades of memories, holidays, graduations, wedding days. My pictures were gone. In their place were staged portraits of the family, edited, pristine, as if I'd never been part of any of it. A silence sat heavy over everything. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow. "I renovated every inch of this house," I said quietly. "With my money, my time, my life." Callista crossed her arms. "Yes, but you never added your name to the deed. Technically, it still belongs to your parents." I turned to my father. He didn't look at me, just stared at the floor like he was waiting for someone to turn off the lights. You all planned this, I said. You've been planning this. We didn't know how to tell you, my mother whispered. No, I said, louder now. You knew how. You just didn't want to see what it would do to me. I placed the papers on the counter, next to the cake. I didn't eat a single slice. By the time I stepped out onto the front porch, the sky had gone from blue to ash gray. The breeze from the marsh carried the scent of salt and something decaying beneath it. I walked down the steps slowly, each one creaking like it knew what was happening. No one followed. The people who said they loved me had handed me a deadline and stayed behind to enjoy dessert. I looked back once, just once, through the front window. I saw silhouettes moving, Callista leaning in to speak with Daniel, my mother cutting the cake, my father still standing near the sink. They didn't look toward the door. No one noticed I was gone. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the end of my silence. The next morning, I woke up still dressed in the clothes I'd worn to my own betrayal. My neck was stiff from the angle I'd collapsed on the living room couch, and a thin crust of frosting clung to the knife on the counter. No one had bothered to clean up the cake they never touched. Sunlight had shifted in the windows, but nothing else had. The air felt stale, as if even the walls were holding their breath. My boots tapped quietly across the hardwood I once restored on my knees. Every creak underfoot now sounded foreign, like I didn't belong here anymore. I walked past the photo wall again. They'd rearranged it. Where once there were pictures of Daniel and me on the porch swing, our graduation in front of the cherry tree, now hung a tight, curated collage. A professional shot of my parents at some charity gala, Callista mid-laugh in a vineyard, Daniel with his wife on a beach. Not a single frame of me. Not even the one with Grandma in her apron, brushing my hair by the kitchen window. I didn't touch the frames. Just stood there, staring, heart tight. The message was clear. This wasn't my home anymore. I was being erased one memory at a time. In the kitchen, my phone buzzed. Just a spam notification. Nothing from family, no apology, no explanation. I opened my email out of habit. Still nothing. I typed Willow Street into the browser bar, not even sure what I was looking for. And that's when it hit me. There it was. My house. Listed online. 4-bedroom, 2-bath, fully renovated Southern charm. Photos I didn't recognize. Angles I never authorized. Wide shots of the living room I painted by hand. My bedroom photographed without consent. Even the garden out back, now described as a potential build site. The listing contact? Callista Monroe. I scrolled slowly, feeling the pressure build behind my ears. They'd done all this while I was still living in the house, selling it like a secret. I closed the browser, heart pounding, and pulled up the old family group thread on my phone. The name had changed. Rickman's Only. I wasn't in it. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Then a voicemail pinged. From Daniel. It must have been a pocket dial. He hadn't meant to send it. I pressed play. Callista said we're past the point of negotiating. She's got Mom and Dad on board. It's already lined up with the city. Just let her manage it. Then a click. The message ended. I sat down at the kitchen table, palms pressed against its surface, grounding myself in something solid. They weren't just pushing me out. They were rewriting the entire family narrative, like I'd never mattered, like I'd never been here. My breath came shorter, but I refused to cry. Not again. I looked toward the studio at the end of the hall, the one room untouched in the listing. I walked there slowly, like stepping through fog. Inside, the scent of wood polish and lavender oil still lingered. The vision board I made years ago hung on the far wall, photos pinned beside magazine clippings of warm porches and reclaimed cabinets. In the corner was a stack of permits, rolled blueprints, receipts for everything from plumbing to paint. This was the proof. This was the record of who really gave life to this house. I dropped to my knees and began pulling everything out, one folder after another. No plan yet, just instinct. I didn't know what I was going to do with it all, but I knew I wasn't going to let them bury me in my own work. Stacks formed across the floor, before and after shots, tax filings, contractor letters. All of it had my name on it. None of it had theirs. When I finally stood, my hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from clarity. The kind that comes when you realize the only way out is forward. I stood at the doorway of the studio, looking back at everything I'd gathered. They can try to cut me out, I whispered to no one, but I was the one who built it. I didn't go upstairs right away. The day had drifted slowly, like dust settling in an abandoned room. I kept finding tasks to do downstairs, organizing drawers I never used, wiping counters already clean, anything to avoid opening that door. But by late afternoon, I knew I had to face it. The stairs creaked beneath my weight, the same way they had every day since I repaired them myself. But this time, each sound echoed too long. I reached the landing and hesitated outside my bedroom. My hand rested on the doorknob for a second that stretched. When I finally pushed it open, the air inside was colder than I expected. Gone. The bed, the shelves, the curtains I sewed by hand, every piece of what made this room mine had vanished. All that remained was the pale imprint on the carpet where my dresser used to stand. And in the center, under the glow of the overhead light, sat a scale model of a condominium project. Sleek. Soulless. A glossy placard labeled the design, Harper Point. It felt like walking into a showroom, not a bedroom. My breath caught. I didn't cry. Not this time. I stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind me, sealing me in with the weight of what had been taken. I lowered myself onto the bare floor, the boards pressing into my spine. I let the silence sink in. For a moment, I could hear the past. Grandma humming as we pasted wallpaper together. Me, at 17, scribbling poems in a notebook beside the open window, the breeze from the marsh stirring the curtains. Nights I painted trim by flashlight, measuring progress by the smell of paint and the ache in my hands. I crawled to the closet, hoping something, anything, might have been left behind. And there, tucked in the far back corner, taped flat against the wall, was a box. Just a small cardboard box, no label. I pulled it free and opened it. Inside were letters, written in my grandmother's familiar looping script, tied with twine and sealed with wax that had cracked over time. The first envelope read, "Jolene, for when they forget what you've done." My throat tightened. I didn't open them, not yet. I wasn't ready. But I held the box close, grounding myself in the one truth I still had. Someone had remembered. Someone once believed I mattered. Later that evening, I found my mother in the kitchen, arranging china that hadn't been touched since Easter 2 years ago. I watched her for a moment, calm, focused, as if she hadn't signed the notice that pushed me out. "You cleared out my room," I said, my voice steady. She didn't look up. It needed to be staged. "For who?" She gently placed a teacup into its saucer. "Callista has investors coming." "I see," I waited. "You could have told me." She finally turned. "I gave up my claim to this house years ago. It's not personal. It's just what women in this family do. We let go." "Maybe that's what you did," I said quietly, "but don't pretend it's a virtue." There was no anger in her face, just resignation. That hurt more than yelling ever could. I left the room without another word, took the box of letters to my studio, and began documenting everything. I pulled out my camera, snapped photos of the changes they made, the architectural model in my room, the bare nails on the wall where my memories once hung. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out permits, receipts, sketches, years of proof that I had poured everything I had into this place. I started organizing it all into a binder. No idea where it would lead, but it felt like reclaiming something. If only for me. Before heading out for a walk, I took a sheet of paper and scribbled a sentence in bold black ink. I walked upstairs, taped it to the door of the now-staged bedroom, and read it aloud to myself before I left. I didn't leave. You just stopped seeing me. The wind had picked up outside. I zipped up my jacket and stepped off the porch, each footstep deliberate. I needed air, even if it tasted of damp wood and disappointment. As I rounded the corner of the house, headlights cut through the dusk. A sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled up the drive. The passenger door opened, and Callista stepped out, followed by two men in tailored suits, briefcases in hand. They didn't see me standing by the side gate, hidden in shadow. But I saw them. And just like that, my grief made way for something sharper. Clarity. They were still there when I returned. Callista stood in the driveway with two men in pressed suits, one holding a tablet, the other pointing toward the front porch like they already owned it. I stayed behind the curtain in the hallway, heart thudding but quiet, barely breathing. From where I stood, I could make out Callista's voice floating through the open window, calm and rehearsed. This is the project site. High visibility. Proximity to the water makes it ideal. Project site. She said it like my home was already nothing more than a line on a blueprint. I slipped out the back door, circling around the garden fence, careful not to snap a twig underfoot. As I crouched behind the old trellis, I watched her laugh. The kind of laugh people give in boardrooms, not in kitchens where someone bakes a cake for your birthday. It was no longer speculation. This wasn't a maybe. They were moving forward. Without me. By late afternoon, I texted Callista and asked her to meet me for coffee downtown. Neutral ground, public enough to keep things civil. She arrived 10 minutes late and 10 degrees too polished for Charleston humidity. Silk blouse, pale lipstick, no sign of the girl who used to sneak popsicles with me on Grandma's back steps. She sat like a woman used to being listened to, not questioned. "I thought this might happen," she said, stirring her tea without looking up. "I figured you'd want some sort of closure." "I'm not here for closure," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm here because I want to hear you say it. Out loud." Callista finally met my eyes. "This isn't personal, Jolene. It's just strategic." "You used to call this house sacred." Her smile didn't budge. "Sacred doesn't sell, but oceanfront legacy, that sells for millions." I blinked slowly. "So that's what this is? A transaction?" "That's what it's always been. You just didn't know you were the asset." She took a sip of tea like she hadn't just told me my worth was measured in resale value. I stood up before she could finish. I needed to know how deep this went, and who else had been sitting at her table when I thought we were all on the same side. Later that evening, I met with Noelle Kramer. We hadn't spoken in years. She was Callista's classmate in college, now working in the city's records office. We met in the lobby of the library, away from prying eyes. "She's been circling this block since sophomore year," Noelle told me. "Talked about reclaiming family assets, like it was part of her brand strategy. She's had coffee with half the planning board. People think she's connected." "Connected to what?" "To your dad," she said flatly. "They've been having calls, regular ones, planning permits, legal transfers, quiet moves." I didn't speak. My hand curled into a fist on the table. Not because of the betrayal, I'd felt that already, but because of the pattern. This wasn't a single act, it was a campaign, a long, slow removal of my place in this family. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. The house was quiet again. So quiet I could hear my own breathing. I drafted an email to my father and Daniel. No emotion, no pleas, just facts. "If development continues without my consent, I will take legal action. This is your only formal notice." I printed a copy and taped it to the front door, right where Callista's sign had been. Then I walked into the center of the living room, the one where we used to decorate the Christmas tree together, and turned slowly in a full circle. This place had been stripped, sanitized, turned into something hollow, but it still had bones, and I knew those bones better than anyone. "If I'm invisible to you all now," I said aloud, voice steady and clear, "then let me reintroduce myself, with proof." I came home with the weight of city records in my bag, and something heavier sitting behind my ribs. Every minute I'd spent digging through deeds and zoning applications at the clerk's office only confirmed what I already knew in my gut. This wasn't just a power play. It was a coordinated sweep, and they were moving fast. I stepped through the front door and paused. The air was different. Not just stale, stripped. Like someone had opened all the windows, aired out the past, and tried to hang something cleaner in its place. I walked the perimeter of the house slowly, notepad in hand, jotting what had changed. The rug gone from the foyer, the old oak mirror replaced with a flat rectangle of black glass. Even the smell of lavender oil had been overtaken by the sharp tang of staged citrus candles. Halfway down the hallway, I heard voices. Male, confident, unfamiliar. I turned toward the back of the house and froze. Callista was in the dining room, gesturing broadly, her voice lilting in that PR cadence she used when she wanted to be impressive. Two men stood beside her in slim-fitting blazers, nodding, one tapping notes into a phone. "And this space is perfect for an open-concept reception lounge," she said. "We've already begun preliminary talks about permits." She didn't know I was there, and she certainly hadn't asked. I stood long enough for her to see me, long enough for her expression to slip, just for a second. Then I turned and walked out. I didn't speak to her that day. Instead, I sent a group text to my parents and Daniel that night, asking for 10 minutes of their time. Just 10. They arrived after dinner, reluctantly, as if responding to a summons rather than a daughter. We sat at the old kitchen table, which had been refinished, of course, without me. I slid a binder across the table. Receipts, permits, design plans, every dollar, every hour I put into this house over 6 years. No one touched it. I kept going. Callista's using the property for investor tours. Without my consent, the listing is live, under her name, and I've found at least 3 instances where documents list future development plans that contradict zoning laws. My father stared at the sugar jar. My mother, her voice barely audible, said, "You're making this harder than it has to be." "No," I said. "You did that when you gave away something I built." Then my father, finally speaking, muttered, "This is family business, Jolene. You wouldn't understand. It's not something for you to get involved in." I sat back, let the silence hang. Then I leaned in. "Then I guess it's time I acted like one of the grown-ups." They didn't stay long after that. When they left, I walked to the hall closet, pulled out the leftover can of white porch paint and a wide brush. I opened the front door. The night was quiet. My hands were steady, and across the inside of the threshold, I painted my name. Jolene Whitman, thick, bold, centered. By the time Callista returned that evening, the paint had dried. She stepped into the foyer, paused, and looked down. "What the hell is this?" she said. "My name," I answered. "In my house." She let out a soft, practiced laugh. "You really think that matters?" "It does now. You're escalating. This isn't going to look good for you." "If you cross that name again," I said, stepping forward, "I will take you down, publicly and legally." She opened her mouth, then shut it. The silence between us cracked like a rope stretched too far. I didn't wait for her to leave. Instead, I drove across town the next morning and met Ramsey at her office. She greeted me with a mug of black coffee and a look that meant business. "Tell me everything," she said, flipping open her laptop. By the end of the hour, we had the outline for a cease and desist drafted. Ramsey read it aloud, then added, "If she wants war in heels, let's show her a courtroom in flats." I smiled. But it wasn't victory, it was permission. Because I thought I had seen the worst, until they proved how low they were willing to go. By noon the next day, I'd driven across town to pick up a fresh ream of legal paper and a new external drive. I wasn't going to risk any of my documentation being lost, and every receipt, permit, and photo now had a backup. I was starting to feel a rhythm. Still angry, yes, but methodical. Focused. Until I came home. The front door was ajar. I paused on the porch, breath held, the plastic bag handles digging into my palm. I hadn't left it like that. No wind could have moved the deadbolt. I pushed it open slowly. Gone. The paint. The name I'd written across the threshold, my name, was scrubbed away. Not faded, not chipped, scrubbed. Deliberate. I stepped inside. The framed blueprints I'd left out on the dining table were missing. So were the binders. On the inside of the door, right where my name had been, was a taped printout. Bold letters in red. Pending possession. Harper Development. My stomach turned cold. I didn't shout, didn't call anyone. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer where I kept my tools, and checked what was left. Nothing seemed stolen, just rearranged, dismantled, as if my presence had been vacuumed from the house piece by piece. Upstairs felt the same, sanitized, erased. I climbed to the attic. It was the only place no one touched, not yet. The insulation still leaked. The floorboards still creaked under my weight. In the far corner, covered with an old quilt and wedged behind a rusted fan, sat a storage box I didn't remember placing there. It had dust so thick it looked like a second lid. I pulled it toward me, my fingers leaving clean streaks behind. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was an envelope, sealed with a dried wax stamp, and my grandmother's handwriting across the front. For Jolene, only when they try to erase you. Inside was a letter. She had written it during the last winter she spent in this house. Her words were steady, though her hands must have been shaking. You're the one who stayed when everyone else turned investment into legacy. They will call it business. They will call it tradition. But you know the difference between memory and marketing. This house is more than a place. It is our marrow. Fight clean. Fight strong. I sat on the floor and read it 3 times. Then I cried for the first time that week. Not out of pain, but recognition. Somebody had seen me. Somebody had believed I was worth defending. That night, I met Ramsey again. Her office smelled like peppermint and ink toner. We didn't talk long, just enough to file the official cease and desist, enough to move forward with a preliminary injunction. As we drafted the documents, she looked up and said, "This is textbook. They want to overwhelm you with speed. You need to overwhelm them with clarity." "I can do clarity," I said. Back home, I composed an email. I CC'd every family member who had been silent, and I addressed it directly to Callista. Subject: unlawful entry and legal action pending body. Any further access to the property without my written consent will be considered trespassing. I have filed legal protection and will pursue damages if necessary. This house is not yours to sell. It never was. I hit send. At 11 that night, I heard the doorbell. I didn't answer it. But when I stepped outside 20 minutes later to lock the gate, I found a cardboard box on the porch. No name, no return address. Inside were 8 photographs, each one of a different room in my house. The kitchen I remodeled, my old bedroom, the garden swing. Red X's were drawn across each one. Fat. Aggressive. Final. Tucked beneath the last photo was a strip of printer paper. Step aside before you get buried in the dust. I stood there for a long time. Then I walked inside, turned off the porch light, and whispered to no one in particular. "Let's dance." I was coming back from the corner store, a bag of light bulbs in one hand and my phone in the other, when I ran into Mrs. Hanley. She was out watering her begonias, sun hat tilted, hose in hand like always. "Oh, Jolene," she smiled, waving me over. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd already moved out." I blinked. "Why would you think that?" "Well," she said, patting the brim of her hat, "your cousin stopped by last night, said the place was set for full demolition, said you'd already started clearing out." I stood there, gripping the bag so tight it crinkled. "She brought blueprints," Mrs. Hanley added. "Showed me what the condos might look like. She seemed very sure." I thanked her, though I couldn't recall what I said, and turned to leave, my feet moving faster than my thoughts could catch up. I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing the edge of the backyard. That's when I saw them, Red flags, wooden stakes, spray-painted markings across my grandmother's garden beds. They'd already started laying the bones of destruction. Inside, the house felt darker than it had in weeks. I sat at the dining table where I used to sort lavender stems, now cleared of everything but rage. By nightfall, I drove to my father's place. His truck was in the driveway. Porch light still worked. I knocked once, twice. He opened the door with a look like he'd expected me. "Did you give her the keys again?" I asked, before stepping over the threshold. He didn't answer. "Did you sign off on the demolition?" Still nothing. His jaw moved like he wanted to say something, but no sound followed. Finally, he said, "You'll understand someday. We had to pick a side." I looked at him, really looked, and asked, "So you didn't pick me?" His eyes welled up, but he didn't move. He didn't reach for me. Just stood there, hands in pockets, the same way he had when I first told him I wanted to restore the house instead of sell it. I turned around and walked away. Back home, I pulled every stake from the yard. One by one, tossed them into a pile like firewood. Ramsey called around 9. "It's time," she said. "We need to move on the injunction. I'll start prepping the public file." "No more quiet steps," I told her. "I'm about to make this family very, very public." That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I set up my phone on a tripod and walked from room to room, filming. "This was my grandmother's sewing room," I said, pausing in the back corner. "She made my prom dress here." I showed the floorboards I refinished, the fireplace I rebuilt after termite damage, the dining table where we'd once said grace before Thanksgiving dinner. When the video was done, I uploaded it to the local community page along with a caption, "My family is trying to erase me. I'm not going anywhere." By morning, I had dozens of messages. Some were supportive, others shocked. Then one private message came through. "No name, no picture. They're going to regret underestimating you, and I have something you need to see." The message came through just after sunrise. No name, no subject line, just a file attachment and one line in the body. "You'll want to hear this before tonight." I sat at the edge of the bed, feet cold against the hardwood, and clicked play. It was Callista. Her voice was unmistakable, calm, clipped, condescending. "Once the party's over, no one will stop us. Not Jolene, not the city. The second that engagement photo hits the press, it's done." I played it again, slower this time. My skin flushed hot, but my mind stayed focused. I forwarded it to Ramsey without hesitation. Within minutes, she confirmed it. Voice match acceptable, date stamp intact, file admissible. There was a second attachment, a scanned copy of the original will. My grandmother's name etched in ink I recognized. And under sole heir, the name Jolene Whitman. No edits, no asterisks, no pending reassignments, until a handwritten addendum in a different pen, dated 3 months after her first hospitalization, in a script that didn't match hers. They hadn't just stolen my house. They had rewritten history. By dusk, the lights of the Bellevue Grand flickered across downtown Charleston like a beacon for the polished and powerful. I stood outside in a black dress that didn't shine, my hair pulled back tight. I wasn't here to blend in. I was here to be seen. Ramsey walked beside me, file folder tucked beneath her arm like a weapon. Inside, champagne flutes clinked and Callista posed near the grand staircase in a cream-colored gown, surrounded by men with press badges and women in sequins. It wasn't just a party, it was a statement. This is who I've become. She hadn't seen me yet. I stepped forward, heels echoing on the marble floor. A staff member moved to intercept, but Ramsey flashed a document and murmured something legal that made him back off. I didn't wait for permission. I reached the center of the ballroom, found the microphone stand by the band setup, and tapped twice. The room quieted. "My name is Jolene Whitman," I said, steady, "and I have something you all should hear." Eyes turned. Some guests looked confused. Others exchanged knowing glances. Callista stood frozen at the foot of the staircase, her fiancé reaching for her hand. She didn't take it. I pressed play. Callista's voice filled the room. "Once the party's over, no one will stop us." The gasps were real. Ramsey moved to the projector screen, pulled up the scanned will, and displayed it beside a forensic handwriting analysis. Words like forgery, fraud, and invalid alteration popped on screen. "This," Ramsey said calmly, "is now part of a pending civil case. We've submitted formal evidence to the city clerk and property board." Callista opened her mouth, closed it. The silence wasn't heavy, it was final. Guests began leaving. Some avoided her eyes. Others whispered names of lawyers they knew. Her father looked away. Even her fiancé removed his hand from her arm. I didn't smile. Not yet. Outside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of magnolia and burnt sugar from a street vendor. Ramsey and I walked without speaking for a while, just letting the moment settle around us. "Do you feel better?" she finally asked. "No," I said, "but I feel seen." We reached her car. Before getting in, I checked my phone. The video I posted, my walkthrough of the house, the story I told, had reached 78,000 views. One message stood out from the flood of comments. "Thank you for standing up. You spoke for people like me, too." I let out a slow breath. I didn't win because I shouted louder. I won because I stopped whispering, and because the truth, once unearthed, doesn't rot quietly. But even justice has its scars, and some doors, once closed, never open the same way again. The morning light came soft and yellow through the front windows, painting the floorboards in a hue that reminded me of how this house used to feel, before the papers, the threats, the betrayals. I stood barefoot at the base of the stairs, coffee cooling in my hand, and just listened. Not for voices or footsteps, but for stillness, for peace. It had been 2 weeks since the gala, 2 weeks since I stood in a room full of strangers and peeled back the mask Callista had worn for years. Since then, the air had settled, but nothing about it felt celebratory, just necessary. I walked the hallway slowly, each step against the wood beneath me, sounding less like a creak and more like a confirmation. A reminder that I had survived something not many do, being erased by the people meant to remember you. There were no calls from my parents, no apologies, no attempts to make sense of it all. My father had gone back to his sister's house. My mother stayed quiet, as always, and maybe that was its own kind of answer. But Daniel surprised me. Yesterday, a package arrived. No return label, no handwriting. Just a padded envelope and a single photo inside. Me and Daniel as kids, sprawled on the lawn eating popsicles, covered in dirt and sunburnt smiles. Taped to it, a post-it. "You were always braver." I didn't cry, but I stared at it longer than I meant to. The house had grown quieter, but not hollow. I started small renovations again. Not for curb appeal, for comfort, for permanence. I repainted the kitchen trim, replaced the faucet with one I'd always wanted, and cleared out the closet full of documents I no longer needed to prove anything. Instead, I opened the garden gate. The neighborhood kids helped me repaint the backyard fence in mismatched shades of green and blue, laughing as they left their handprints between the planks. I planted lavender along the back wall, just like Grandma used to. The scent clung to the evening air, like memory stitched into cotton. Neighbors who once looked away now waved. Some even stopped to chat. They asked about the video, about the trial, about healing. Ramsey and Noelle came by on Sundays, sometimes with iced tea, sometimes just to sit on the porch and listen to the wind roll off the river. We didn't talk about the case much anymore. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been written or sworn under oath. One afternoon, while sorting recipes in the kitchen drawer, I opened my inbox and found a message from someone I didn't know. "You saved your house. I lost mine. But hearing you made me feel seen." I read it twice, then printed it out. It's taped to the fridge now, next to the last photo of Grandma and me, the one where she's standing in the doorway with flour on her cheeks and pride in her eyes. I don't know if what I feel now is forgiveness. It's quieter than that. Not relief exactly, not vengeance. Just a steadiness, a peace that I earned. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's repainting a wall with the radio on low, or hearing laughter in a place once filled with silence. Sometimes it's being able to sit at the window, cup of tea in hand, and not feel like you have to prove you're allowed to be there. I sit here often now. It's where this all started. Me, this house, the war I didn't ask for but fought anyway. Not every fight ends with reunion. Some just end. And that's enough. Because sometimes you don't get closure from others. You give it to yourself. They tried to bury me, in silence, in paperwork, in polite smiles, and forged signatures. But what they didn't understand was this. You can't erase someone who remembers who they are. If you've followed my story to the end, maybe you've seen yourself in some part of it. Maybe you've been overlooked in your own family. Maybe you've been told to just let it go, when something you built was taken from you without thanks or recognition. I'm here to tell you, it's not weak to protect what matters. It's not petty to say, this is mine, especially when you bled to make it so. I didn't win by shouting. I didn't win by begging. I won by standing my ground with clarity and truth. Not all victories end with applause. Sometimes they end with stillness, and the quiet knowing that you didn't break when they wanted you to bend. So if you're out there fighting for a place in your own story, I see you, and I hope you never stop writing your name where it belongs. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt pushed aside by the people closest to you? Have you ever had to reclaim something that should have never been taken? If this video touched you, drop a 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. If you didn't like it, tell me why. Your voice matters here. And if you want more stories like this, raw, honest, and full of heart, hit that subscribe button and be part of the journey. Until next time, take care of your truth, and don't let anyone write you out of it.